Well, it's been said that burbot is the poor man's lobster, and here in Alberta we have no shortage, I believe, of this particular fish. Not the prettiest looking critter, but boy, they do taste good. You may notice on a couple of Alberta lakes this coming summer, boats from the Alberta Conservation Association dropping some nets, and they are doing some important research on burbot. To give us more information about it, a real pleasure to welcome Todd Zimmerling, President and CEO of the Alberta Conservation Association. Todd, talk a little bit about burbot and why your interest is piqued.
Well, because it's poor man's lobster, so why wouldn't you be interested? I gotta say, anybody who's saying that hasn't had lobster, it's good. There's no doubt about it. Burbot are good, but lobster I think is pushing it. But regardless, a very good tasting fish for sure. Yeah, I mean one of the interesting things about burbot is if you take a look at their history, they've only relatively recently been listed as a sport fish. For years and years, they were considered, quote unquote, a trash fish, right? If the commercial fishermen caught them in their nets, they were just dumped on the ice, and anglers didn't really worry about them. But I think more and more people started to try them and realize, hey, this is actually a pretty good fish, and they became a sport fish. And right now, our regulations allow for burbot to be fished in February, March, which is the spawning time for them. And anybody who knows anything about fishing burbot knows you go to their spawning grounds and you set up there in the evening, and you can do fairly well catching burbot. And of course, you don't need to be a fisheries biologist to know that, well, that might create a problem if we don't have a sense of how many burbot are there, how many being caught, that sort of thing. So given it has historically been a lower profile fish, we started a project on this 2 years ago. Last year we worked on a couple of lakes a little further north, and this year we're now down sort of in the Edmonton area working on Lac Sainte-Anne and Lac Santé.
And in terms of what is it a population census? Is it just, I guess you kind of have to have a baseline to know where you're starting from, and then what the impact of the angling pressure is down the road.
Yeah, so realistically, what we're doing is we're trying to test population census techniques. So do we have a foolproof way of actually being able to get some numbers and figure out how many burbot are in a particular lake, and as well, what does the population structure look like? How many big ones, how many little ones, that sort of idea. So that's part of what we're doing, is really testing, and now there's techniques from other jurisdictions that have been used, so that's what we're doing right now. And so you'll see our crews using nets, but also more often also using traps. So cod traps basically is what they're doing. And they're finding things out, like, different depths don't work as well as other depths for trying to catch burbot in cod traps. And so we're sort of learning as we go here as to what's going to be the best technique for trying to do these population estimates. But the end goal is, yes, trying to get an idea of how many, refining the technique, and then getting an idea of how many burbot do we have in various lakes, so that we can start looking at are there any issues here. And I mean, I fish Lac Santé, and I hear all kinds of people saying that we're not catching as many, or they're not as big, that sort of thing. And how much that is just anglers had a bad day versus how much is that the population actually is changing, that's an important thing from a fishery standpoint.
And not to be flippant about it, but it seems that anytime that we raise awareness around a species, people get interested and they want to target that species. Is that a concern for you?
Well, it is a concern when hosts are saying it tastes like lobster. Who's not going to want to target it, right? So, but yeah, I mean, and plus you got to remember that it's a species that in a lot of lakes you can catch quite a few. 5 to 15, depending upon what lake you're in. Plus, it's a winter fishery, so it's a time of year where there's not a lot of other fishing opportunities, so people like to go and do that. I mean, there's a lot of upside to burbot fishing. They taste good. If you're on the right spot, you can catch and keep a lot of them. The time of year when you're fishing is actually quite pleasant to be out there. Heck, you can sit out there and listen to the hockey games while catching burbot at the same time. It really doesn't get much better than that, right? So it's a fun time out in the lakes when you're doing that. So I understand why people are doing it for sure. But I think anybody who has done a lot of burbot fishing in some of these lakes has also realized that, yeah, maybe we have to take a closer look to make sure that we're not going to overfish these populations, because in some cases, I've been out some of those lakes and there might be 200 or 300 vehicles out on a lake in an evening, all in a relatively small area. So that could have a pretty big impact pretty quickly if we don't have a sense of what are our populations like, how well are they reproducing, those kinds of things.
So it's been a couple of years that you've been introducing the how to go about doing the census. When do you finish that process and then actually start working on determining population numbers?
Well, last year we did very well in getting some really good data, and we think we've got the technique down. So now we've moved to two more lakes, and I employed the same technique. And as of the first run this spring, it wasn't working as well. So now we've got to figure out, is that just a one-off, or is there something we're missing here? So that we'll know better by the end of this year as to was that just a glitch, or our technique only worked in a couple northern lakes, and now we've got to rethink how we're dealing with it. So it's something we're still working on.
And I guess ultimately this will also help you with distribution, knowing how many lakes that these critters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a pretty good sense of where at least some live, because we can get that sort of from fishing records. People have said they've caught a burbot, but if it was one burbot out of 1,000 hours of fishing versus 1,000 burbot from 1,000 hours of fishing, very different. So it'll definitely give us a good sense of the relative numbers of burbot in various lakes. And hopefully we can start also moving towards habitat use. Where are these fish showing up during the non-spawning times? We have a pretty good sense of where they'll go when they spawn, but where are they hanging out when they're not spawning? Where do we find them most often? Those kinds of things. So the next step would be sort of getting a better understanding of the ecology of these fish in the various lakes, and how does that get impacted by changes in walleye or pike. So that's sort of down the road where it leads to. At this point, it's sort of the very basic: how many do we have in this lake, and do we have any concerns on the population size to start with?
It all just kind of emphasizes the point that there is no end in sight when it comes to understanding our fisheries and the impact that so many factors.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And what I find very interesting is the anglers always have the answers to all these questions, and I'm no different. I'm an angler like everybody else, based on my personal experiences, what I saw, kind of idea. Some of them are right, some of them are not, but they're always passionate about it. They always want to ensure that there is a fisheries there, not just for them to enjoy, but to make sure the fish population itself doesn't get harmed. It's the passion is always there every time, and that's why I guess I want to ensure people realize when they're seeing somebody drop these big cod traps over the sides of the boat, that's who it is. If you're at Lac Santé or Lac Saint Anne this summer, it'll be some of our staff out there doing these projects and trying to get a sense of where we're at on the burbot populations.
Outstanding. Well, as one of some 200,000 anglers here in Alberta, I certainly have some opinions about our fishery, but I'm happy to, Todd is with us here to set some of my comments straight, especially when burbot come to talk or taste like lobster. Anyways, Todd, thanks so much.
Thank you.